Thanks everyone for attending this morning. We want to welcome you today and say thanks for getting up early and making the time to come in. We're pleased to announce and continue to kind of beat the drum this year that this is our 25th anniversary. It's hard to believe that 25 years have gone by, but it has. It's an exciting time with all the different things that are going on. It's hard to believe that almost a year ago we moved to this location here at Providence Towers, and so there's a lot of great things that are taking place. We're working to have some other different events and stuff this year as part of our 25th, and so you'll be hearing about some of those things. There's a couple different things sitting there in front of you today. One is the CPE evaluation form. We would like for you to fill that out and return it at the registration desk. If you want CPE credit for CPAs, that kind of stuff, let us know. Also, there's an evaluation form there for the actual program itself. We're always open to looking for topics and new and different things that we can include. You'll notice that just like today, that we try and find things that we think are out and around topics that are necessary to listen to and talk about in the business environment that we all work in today, but not necessarily just financial, accounting, tax, things like that you would typically think the CPA firm. Because we understand the reason for Aspire is that people are aspiring to extend their knowledge out a little bit further, so we're really trying to work on that. But if you'll make sure and fill those out for us, we really covet your feedback on the topics as we're beginning to look and see what we can do. There are also some handouts and videos of prior sessions that are available on the website. We have a video vault there. You'll notice today that we're videoing this, as we always do, but those are there. We break them into actually smaller segments too, so you don't have to listen to a whole program, but you can go and pick out specific topics and things from those various areas that you want to hear about. And the March session, by the way, is now available on the website for viewing and stuff. Well, it's my pleasure this morning to introduce Terry Bennett. Terry is a strategically minded difference maker. He improves business results through people, processes, and technology, specifically in that order. Terry partners with others to establish a vision for the use of technology that's in complete alignment with the corporate strategic plan. He empowers people to accomplish this in creative ways while helping them remove roadblocks and discover ways to accelerate their return on investment. His team is coached to be business professionals, not simply technologists, and he works to tear down the walls that too often exist between IT and the typical business people. Terry seeks ways also to identify ways that he can differentiate his company and their firm from its competition while generating ideas to reduce costs and help increase revenue. In addition, he delivers a level of satisfaction that absolutely delights those he serves. This morning, he's going to talk about technology-related business disruptions, pitfalls to look out for, and how we can better protect ourselves and our information online. We had asked him to come and talk today specifically because of all the things you hear about hacking and stuff like that, and what we can do and how we can make that work. Terry was made me feel really comfortable just thinking about all the financial data we had, because he told me, he said, you'll never be protected. So that makes me sleep really well. Let me welcome Terry.
Thanks, Greg. Thank you. This morning, my purpose is to excite you and honestly to make you a little scared about the things that are going on out in your business community and around the world, how that technology is actually causing business to be disrupted. How many of you remember back when you were a kid and you would dream about when's summer vacation going to happen? Or you think about how long it's going to be until I get a driver's license. Any of y'all ever remember doing that? And it always seemed like it'd be forever before those kind of things would happen, right? Does it seem to you that perhaps the world's moving a little faster today? Honestly, it's because you're getting older. But that's not the only thing. And what we're going to see is there really are things that are moving faster today than ever before. For example, back at one point in time, if we ever wanted to increase, for example, the amount of crops that we went out and cultivated in the field or we planted in the field, it was just a matter of manpower, right? We had people that go out, and if we want to increase it, what we had to do, okay, I'd go out and hire another person or another two people. It's a linear progression. And then we went from that and we began to use beasts of burden. We began to use horses and cows and oxen, different things like that to help us. And yes, we could get things done faster than we could with just a single human being. But it's still a linear progression. You want to increase the number of crops that you're going to get out of the field? Go get some more animals or go get some more humans. And that's really all that it came down to. When the Industrial Revolution hit, all of a sudden things began to change. One person could do the work of 10 people or maybe even 100 people. But there was something else that happened there. Because you see, think about how quickly you could go out and hire a person or buy another animal to help you plant more crops. When you're talking about building factories or you're talking about building machines, it takes longer. So there's a big time element involved, and not only is there a time element involved, there's a capital expense involved. So it gets expensive. And so as we began putting those factories around the world, there's a big issue. And what ends up happening is sometimes companies have had to go out and CEOs have had to almost bet the farm over a decade-long development of a new factory. Bet the farm because they don't get the results until that factory gets online. And there may be something that changes in the meantime, or there may be something that they actually were guessing wrong about. Let me give you an example. How many of you heard of the Iridium satellite? Some of you heard of that? Iridium was a company that was actually a spin-off of Motorola. And Motorola spun this company off in the late 80s. And what Motorola was really doing, they were trying to make a play to take the entire mobile phone industry and they were going to dominate it. And this move was very much lauded by everyone around. Because see, what Motorola had figured out that everybody else hadn't really figured out is that, yeah, we can put a lot of cell phone towers in. It's really not that difficult to do it in these really densely populated areas. But the problem is, if we start talking about areas that are not so densely populated and begin moving out away from the cities and we begin moving into the farming communities or around the world, it gets expensive because, see, at that time, a cell phone tower cost about $100,000 to put up. And not only did you have that, you had problems with the frequencies and how many frequencies were available and the speed of things there. And for that matter, you remember those brick phones back then? The cost was pretty expensive for them to manufacture. And so what they did is they said, we're going to take and we're going to put a satellite network around. And there are going to be 77 satellites. That's where the name iridium came from. Iridium is an element, and that's number 77 on your chemicals chart. And we're going to put 77 satellites around the country, or around the world. And that's going to take the place of all the cell phone towers. And they figured out how to make that profitable. Was all we've really got to do is we've got to have 1 million customers from certain developed countries buy one of these cell phones, $3,000 a whack. How's that compared to today? And $5 a minute. And that's all we've got to do. So they spun this company off, began working on it. Late 80s, it took them till 98, as I recall, to get the thing finished. About 12 years, okay? And what happened during that 12-year time is they continued working on it. They'd made a bet, okay? And what ended up happening? Well, during that 12-year time period, they really didn't keep watching things. They didn't change their strategy. They kept on going with things. They lost $5 billion. And honestly, Motorola wasn't the only one that did it. There were a couple of other competitors that jumped into the very same kind of thing, and they lost $5 billion. So there was a total of $10 billion during this time period that was lost because they'd actually bet the company in some ways that the demand is going to outpace the technology. So there's issues when we get into that kind of thing. But you know, that's not the only one. We talked for a moment ago about, how many remember that guy? Zach, that's right, okay. Saved by the bell. Anyway, we talked for a moment ago about what the technology was like back then. And it was huge. I talked to some ladies the other day who, in the early 80s, their parents had got them a bag phone so they could take it back and forth to college as they were traveling to college. And they told them and said, don't ever use it. It's too expensive to use. And that's the way, I mean, it had to be an emergency for that to happen. Well, back during those days in the 80s, McKinsey and Company was advising AT&T. And they were talking to them about AT&T was considering getting in really heavy into the mobile phone market. And McKinsey and Company said, no, don't do it. Because the state of technology and everything, by the time the year 2000 rolls around, there's going to be less than 1 million cellular phones. So you'd be making a mistake to jump into it. AT&T listened to them. And as a result, one of the biggest business opportunities they ever had went by the wayside. In fact, McKinsey was so wrong that by the year 2000, there were over 100 million cell phones out there. And so not only did they miss it by 99%, but also think of what that did really to AT&T. But that's not the only example. Here's another one. There was a study done of the decade 2000 to 2010 of companies like Gartner and Forrester and McKinsey and Jupiter, some of those companies that are very much into prognostication and very well recognized as experts. And here's what happened. In 2002, they projected the mobile phone industry would grow by 16% in the next 2 years. In reality, what happened? The industry grew 100%. So they thought they learned something. In 2004, they did another projection. They said it's going to grow 14% in the next 2 years. Well, it grew another 100%. In 2006, they projected 12%. It grew another 100%. And you would think they'd get it right by the next year, but they didn't. In 2008, they projected a 10% growth, and it grew 100%. And what you see happening is what we're used to doing so often is we're used to thinking linearly. That's a hard word to say sometimes. Say it 3 times real fast. Linearly, that's the way we're thinking. When what's happening is really we're experiencing an exponential growth. And you know what? It's not only happening here. I mean, this study was the mobile phone industry, and after they did that study, they went back and looked, and they've seen it happen in the oil industry and in a number of other industries. The very same kind of thing happened. People are not paying attention to the growth that technology is causing. Robotics, gotten very big. In 2011, some people that are very much into predicting these kinds of things said, you know, robotics, by about the year 2025, they're going to really begin to take off. A year later, Google invested a lot of money in 6 companies that are dealing with robotics. And all of a sudden, the industry just started burgeoning. This particular toy helicopter here, 8 years ago, wasn't even made, okay? 5 years ago, it would have cost $700. You know what it costs today? On Amazon, about $20. $20. In fact, there's a gyro mechanism in this particular helicopter that 30 years ago, space shuttle engineers would have paid over $100 million to develop it. Tell me that things aren't moving quickly. Robotics, from an industrial standpoint, are really starting to take off. Here, for example, Baxter Robot. Baxter Robot, $22,000. $22,000, and it can be programmed by people in your factory. So it's got a simple enough interface to do that kind of thing. It's beginning to make manufacturing cheap enough that we're beginning to pull labor or pull manufacturing jobs, in essence, back from China. Think what kind of thing that's going to have on the effect of the Chinese economy, because they're getting paid off their cheap labor force. So, and think what happens if they end up calling their debt. I mean, there can be huge implications out of this. Microsoft uses guard robots to roam around their campus. Does that remind you of R2-D2? It does me. Amazon, some of you've probably seen the Amazon distribution centers. Amazon uses these robots, and they're projected to save $900 million a year using robots. The hotel industry, there's a hotel in Cupertino, California that opened this last fall, and they use this robot up here on the left. It's called Bottler Robot. And what happens if you wanted some more towels for your room, let's say, you call down to the front desk takes and loads towels into the top of this robot. They punch in your room number. The robot takes off. The robot goes up to the elevator, calls the elevator, in essence, interfaces with the elevator to get the right floor, goes to your room, avoiding things in the hall like people or a cart that's there or anything like that, avoiding things in the hall, goes up to your room, rings your phone to tell you that it's there. You open the door, you take the towels out, pat the robot on the head, and he goes off and goes back. Pretty amazing. But it's not nearly as amazing as the one in Japan. This one is in Japan, this lifelike robot. A hotel that's going to be opening this summer in June. These robots will greet you at the front desk, check you in. They'll take your luggage, they'll clean your room. They speak several different languages and understand several different languages. Actually, the next step that they're going to make on these robots I thought was kind of interesting. They want to give them goosebumps and make them sweat. I don't quite understand why, but that's what they're wanting to do there. This hotel is opening with 10 of these robots and 10 employees, and that's all they're opening with. And honestly, the only reason they've got 10 employees is they're just a little concerned about what's going to happen because it's still in some ways an experiment, right? But their intent is they're going to get to the point that it is 90%, the hotel is 90% staffed by robots. Things are moving quickly, but it's not just robotics. Look here, 3D printing. In 2007, a good 3D printer, a 3D printer that cost $40,000, in 2014 would cost $100. That's an improvement of 400x in 7 years. Industrial robots, I already mentioned one $22,000 today. That would have cost $500,000 in 2008. 23 times improvement, just 5 years. Drones, you're seeing a lot about drones right now. Not just Amazon, but as Amazon began pressing it, there's a lot of insurance companies that have been approved for drones lately. I don't know if you've noticed that, but that's something that's happening a tremendous amount. But drones have gone from $100,000 down to $700, 142 times improvement. Solar, we're getting great improvements in the solar industry. And honestly, one of the things that's happening is the rest of the energy industry is fighting it to some extent because they're concerned about it. It's amazing what's happening out there. But that's not all. How many of you heard of the Internet of Things? I mean, that's a pretty popular thing today. And really all it is talking about connecting a lot of sensors and a lot of different things to it, okay, to the current internet. I mean, really that's all it is. But what happened is 10 years ago, we had about 500 million devices that were attached to the internet. Today, we got about 8 billion. Projections are, depending on who you're talking to, between 2020 and 2025, there's going to be somewhere between 20 billion and 50 billion devices attached to the internet. A decade later, 2035, there's supposed to be 1 trillion. We sit there and we think about the internet, and we don't, in some ways we don't think about it so much, but it's been around 30, 40 years, whatever you want to say, and we think that we've gone a long ways. When you start looking at these figures, we've gone about 1% of the way. We're just beginning to know what's going to happen with all these sensors that are out there, and it's huge. It's huge. All of this is bringing about a great disruption in business because the technology is allowing people to go out and attack these other companies and attack these other businesses. Think what's happened to the book industry. Think what's happened to the newspapers or travel or music or cameras. The GPS industry. You know, I mean, it wasn't that long ago that I went out and bought a GPS. Let's say I was in Kansas City, so it was probably about 10 years ago. Bought it, and I was late buying one, a GPS system for my car. Then they started installing them in cars, and now what do? It's on your phone. So you're seeing things, even something that got disrupted. GPS started disrupting maps, the mapping industry, and now that whole industry has been disrupted. So it's happening all over. But it's not just happening in these kinds of industries. It's hard to find any industry today that isn't being disrupted to some extent by technology. Even industries like construction. I mean, you think about construction, and we've got a lot of manual work that goes on there, right? And so you'd think, we're not going to have any big deal there. Well, it really has, because the technology has allowed a lot more collaboration between companies. As that collaboration comes, prices go down. The software that they use has become much more sophisticated, and the 3D printing is making a huge difference. In fact, the differences are so much when you start combining all these things. Projections are that the construction industry is going to lose 25% of their jobs within 10 years. That's not a small amount. It's not small at all. I mentioned 3D printing. Huge what's going on in 3D printing. You know, they've already made 10,000 orthopedic knee implants for dogs and install them. And what happened when they did that? The surgery was easier. The dog recovered faster than ever before. You think that's not going to happen to humans? We're going to begin using that. Where 3D printing had been used just for prototypes on things, it's being used for real things now. Think about something as simple as, I can 3D print shoes now and get it to the pattern of your feet. Imagine what that's going to do to Dr. Scholl's or some of those kind of people, right? And it goes beyond that. It's not going to be very long. I mean, it's almost cheap enough now you can put it into your home, but it's not fast enough. And there's been a big investment on how are we going to speed up 3D printing. As that happens, what you're going to see is you're going to be able to print from your home. Tools, toys, I mean, a lot of different things, anything you design. And even, in fact, they're headed toward being able to print electronics there as well. Imagine being able to print your own iPhone in your home. Pretty amazing thought, isn't it? And beyond that, it's going to have an effect on companies, because think about the storage that a lot of companies have, because they say, we're going to keep these parts over here for these machines or these things that we're not producing anymore. And so we have to stockpile these parts back here. You know what's going to happen? At some point, it's going to be that they will just sell you the pattern, you insert it in, and you can print it at home. So tremendous things that are happening in the 3D printing industry. Again, let me go back to what the effect is on some of the other parts of the world. For example, China, that is well known for the cheaper plastics that they make. If we begin being able to print that at home, it has an effect on the global economy. And so we've got to be very well aware of that. Universities are being threatened by what's called a MOOC. Everybody heard of a MOOC, right? Massive online open courses. And basically what that means is it's open to anybody, and you won't have to, and so there's not regulations there, and attendance is not required. But there's a lot of learning that people are gaining out of those kind of things. And there are some universities that are really starting to explore that because they're worried about what's going to happen. Your modern Ford has a Texas Instrument processor in it. That Texas Instrument processor is 1.8 million times more powerful than one of the computers that we use to put people on the moon. It's pretty impressive, isn't it? iPhone 6, 1 million times more powerful than the IBM computer we used back in 1975, and that computer took up an entire room. And you're carrying it around in your pocket. And not only that, not only is it more powerful, it's cheaper. Remember the days, some of them even today, that some of your computers were $1,000 to $4,000? Your desktop computers? Your iPhone 6 has more power and can do more things and is cheaper. The future is just coming, and it's coming faster and faster than ever. So, what's causing it? One of the things is, how many of you heard of Moore's Law? Moore's Law basically says that processing price performance is going to double every 18 months. And he came up with that law, and since that time there have been more studies done with that. And a guy named Kurzweil came up with what's called the law of accelerating returns. And what he found is, number one, Gordon Moore, when he originally wrote that law, and by the way, that law has just turned 50 years old. I don't know if any of you saw that. That was kind of amazing in itself. But when Gordon Moore first made that postulate and began looking at that, Kurzweil went back into the early 1900s to begin looking at technology. It says it's really been happening a lot longer than Gordon Moore was looking at. But beyond that, it's not just the processors that go on a board. What it really is any kind of technology is actually having this same kind of rate. In fact, as we turn things into information, it gets even faster because it begins to double every year. And what happens on top of that is that we're using the computers that we just made to make the next set of computers, to make the next set of computers, and so that process is becoming faster as well. All in all, you have lots and lots of things that are going there together. In fact, when technologies start to intersect, when you start to bring different types of technologies together, for example, what's happening with things like social and mobile and big data and all those kind of things, and you start to bring them together, what you really have is a multiplier effect. So it gets even faster. Ultimately, what you have is disruption because it's far beyond what anybody was expecting. There was a guy, Clay Shirky, wrote a book, and what he said was, you know, revolution doesn't happen because society adopts new technologies. Revolution happens because society adopts new cultures. I want you to think for a second. Have all these technologies had an effect on the culture of society? It's huge, isn't it? I mean, we're always on, we're always connected. Our kids, I mean, I've got a granddaughter that's what, 1.5 now, oh, actually almost 2. But she'll pull out your iPhone and start playing with it. And you don't even have to show her how. And it's pretty amazing to me when you see things like that. It's having a huge effect, but it's also having an effect on customers. Because you see, back in the old days, what happened is we couldn't really very effectively compare prices. We had to buy basically from the location in our immediate vicinity or in our town. And we really didn't have a lot of information on what the thing was that we were buying. But now, we've got all the information we want. We can order it immediately, and we can get it delivered from anywhere in the world. So we've got a lot of price comparison we're doing. We've got a lot of information that we're pulling there together. Your customer may know more about your product than you do. And they've got more input. They don't just have input into the way you're doing customer service, they have input into your product development process, or they need it. And if you're missing that, you're missing a problem. I mean, you're going to have a problem because it's being demanded. Any of you ever seen the video that went viral? This was a number of years ago, actually. United broke my guitar. The guy wrote a video, he went and recorded a song because he'd shipped his guitar on United and they broke it and they wouldn't pay for it. And he got mad, does that. The video goes viral. United gets a big black eye out of it. Now that's a really old one, but it's happening all the time, just like that. Your customers have much more input. And so this business disruption, honestly, is not just technology fueled, it's also customer led. We have to become to the point that we are obsessed with our customer. We've got to pay a lot more attention to what's going on there and what the interfaces are there and involve them. Another thing that's happening is our economy has become more collaborative, because what's ended up happening is people are beginning to look at scarce resources and abundant resources, for that matter. You have something I need. How many of you have a book or a tape or a movie or something, music or something at home that you don't really pay attention to much anymore, but just hadn't got rid of it? Any of you have that? If you could look out there and find something that somebody had, another piece of music, for example, that you wanted, and they're willing to swap you, would you swap them? There's a site called Swaptree that does that. And it wasn't that long ago that what happened was we wouldn't have trusted that, but honestly, the internet actually has improved trust with people, which is kind of interesting. Think about eBay when I say that. You're paying money, giving money for something, a product that you haven't seen, you don't know the buyer, you don't know the seller. And what do? You're checking things out and you're looking at their online reputation, and they've sold a whole bunch of times, they're rated very high, and so you look at that and so, okay, I trust them, so I'll give them money. It's changing things tremendously. It's looking at other things, not only scarce resources. Here, there's a site, if I remember right, it's called Zolo, that basically anybody got $100 that they're willing to lend, it'll match you up with somebody else in the world that wants to borrow the money, and you get the return out of that. There's another site called Landshare that will take, and you got a backyard or space in your backyard, it'll match you up with somebody that wants to plant a garden. They come plant the garden in your yard, and you share in the produce. That's another thing that's going on. There's companies that you pay a monthly fee, and that monthly fee gives you the right to understand about these people that are willing to rent their car by the hour, and it connects you with them. Or New York City, there's an app that I'm about to leave my parking space, and so I click that I'm about to leave my parking space, and it beams out to people that are in that particular area to come get your parking space. Again, it's amazing what's happening out of things like that. Areas are ripe for disruption because, in companies or industries that perhaps have broken trust with people, there's a lot of them out there. That's an area ripe for disruption, or complex tasks, because what's happening is people are pulling off different pieces of things, maybe even your most profitable piece of your business, because they don't have to do it all. And they pull off a piece of it and begin offering that service. Or where there's too many, the internet is reducing the number of middlemen. And so there's too many intermediaries, and it's beginning to have an effect there. Let me just give you an example. How many of you know what Airbnb is? Anybody not know what Airbnb is? Okay. Hilton versus Airbnb. Huge difference. It took Hilton 93 years to get 600,000 rooms. It took Airbnb 4 years. 4 years. And now Airbnb has over 1 million. So they've far surpassed Hilton. Hilton owns over 4,000 hotels, Airbnb, 0. Hilton has 135,000 employees. Airbnb has about 500. Can you see the difference in what's happening here? In fact, other people are seeing it too. Because if you go back and look at the market cap evaluation, look at this. Hilton, yes, is at the top of the industry at 27, almost 29, almost 28 billion. But look at Airbnb. Airbnb, in just a short amount of time, owning no rooms, comes in at $20 billion market cap. And look how many people they're ahead of. It's having a huge difference. So what's driving this collaborative economy? Because that's another thing that's going along with this technology disruption. The first is there's a change in attitude towards sharing and interacting with strangers. I mentioned a bit ago about eBay and what effect eBay has had on actually improving the trust with people going on, conducting transactions over the internet. But think for a moment. Your kids put anything out there on Facebook for everybody to see? I mean, that's what ends up happening, right? It actually has changed our attitude in interacting with strangers. People aren't afraid anymore, in some cases, of going in and having a ride-sharing program where I'm going to ride from one area, one city to another. This happens a lot in Europe. I'm going to ride from one city to another, and a stranger is going to be the one that takes me. It's not an issue. It's becoming very commonplace. In fact, we think sometimes it's only the millennials doing this, but in reality, there was a study done recently that said 66% of people would be willing to share their assets with somebody if I can make some money out of it. 64% said I'll rent something from somebody else that I don't know if I can do that. So it's got an effect all over. There's changing views of technology. You know, for my age, or for sure for my parents' age, what was a telephone? It's something that I talk over, and that's all it is, right? It's a communication device. Anymore, what is it? It's your key to the world. It's your remote control. That's what your kids see it, maybe even more than you do. There's a changing view toward technology. And beyond that, there's a backlash toward consumerism. A lot of what we've been growing up in the 80s, 90s, even the early 2000s, was a generation of I and of me and how much I can consume. And what's happening now is there's a big backlash going against that. And it's a lot more about me, about we, and it's a lot more about social consciousness. And you look at companies even that are pushing things like conscious capitalism and the way they have to give back not only to their stockholders, but to their customers, to their employees, to the community, all those different kinds of things. And those companies are becoming very profitable. Not only do we have that, we've got economic changes. Because you see, there are stalwarts of economic theory, like the London School of Economics and the Harvard School of Business, that are beginning to question things like return on investment and return on assets. And where should we really be looking at that? In fact, there was a 2-year study done by the Harvard School of Business, the Harvard Business Review, the CEB, several others along the very same lines. And what they ended up coming out with was some different things about economic theory. In fact, what they said, Jim Steichleather had written something about it. And what it in essence boils down to is, if you have something that you need within your company, if it's not bringing a direct value to the company, don't be buying that thing. You need to be renting it. That has a huge effect. I mean, from a technology standpoint, we've built huge data centers, right? And had huge capital investments doing that. The cloud, software as a service, infrastructure as a service, all those things are having a huge effect on those. But it's having an effect everywhere. Because you see, part of this collaborative economy has taken and said, instead of asset-heavy industries, what we need to be looking at is companies that are asset-light, and they're connectors, they're networkers. There was a study done of companies in the S&P 500. Back in the 1920s, the average stay there was 67 years. Today it's 15 years. That's a big difference. But you know, it's going to change. Because what you've got is these gigantic companies, and you've got companies that are looking at things in a different way. They've got different business models, they've got different technologies, they don't have the legacy structures, they don't have the silos within the business that others have. And they're attacking them and just attacking pieces of the company and pulling off little bits of it. And it's going to happen more and more. In fact, there was a study done in 2011 that said, a prediction made that 40% of the companies on the Fortune 500 list at that time would no longer even survive a decade later. Huge difference. I mentioned new business models. This whole technology disruption is having a great effect on new business models. For example, Uber. Uber is the world's largest taxi company. They have no vehicles. Facebook, most popular online content, yet they don't create it themselves. Think about Wikipedia. I mean, it's one I didn't put up here. Wikipedia, I mean, think about the effect they had on Encyclopedia Britannica. And yet Wikipedia is not putting that stuff out there themselves. Alibaba, most valuable retailer, no inventory. We've already talked about Airbnb, the world's largest accommodation provider. They have no real estate. So you can see the effect that's happening here about how this business disruption, these new business models are having an effect on people. Again, they're biting off little pieces of it. They're looking for places that customers are not content and finding things that they can go do that are a lot faster. And it's going to have an effect. But there's concerns with all this. I mean, it's not just all a bed of roses, right? There's concerns. Here's one of them. Our social skills are struggling. You ever seen two people sitting next to each other and they're texting maybe even each other? We're struggling because we have trouble reading emotion anymore. There's a study done that they took away phones from some people that were very much connected to their phones, took them away and made them interact, and some of those social skills began to come back. But it's having an effect because it's happening that as we interact with that screen, we can't read the emotion in people. In fact, when we end up talking to them face to face, we're having more difficulty reading that emotion. Our critical thinking skills are really suffering because we're so used to multitasking, we can't concentrate enough to put the critical thinking skills on. There was a study done of customers in a fast food restaurant. What it found is that 70% of the parents got distracted by their mobile devices during the meal. 70%. And during that time, you know what their kids were doing? The kids were acting up, they were complaining, they were throwing food sometimes even at the parents. We're having an effect on our parenting. And so there's issues that happen out of those kinds of things. Jobs. Think about the automated checkout line at the grocery store. The kiosk that you go check in at the airline terminal, the toll booth operator. I mean, there's lots and lots of things that you can think of that have been disrupted. Data entry clerks, the travel industry, the travel agencies. I mean, you can think of lots of them that have gone away. And there's issues there because it hurts when we lose jobs, doesn't it? And you look at these fields that are most likely to be impacted. I thought that was kind of interesting. I mean, I look on there and I see IT, and it's kind of interesting that IT would be an industry because isn't IT the one that's fueling a lot of this? Well, in some ways, but think about what's happening as we move to the cloud. You've got all these people that are used to dealing with infrastructure or desktop support or those kind of things. Those jobs are affected. The accounting and finance industry is going to be affected because there's things that can be done to automate pieces of that. And it's going to have a huge effect on jobs when we talk about that. Obviously, as we get into robots, and I mean more, that's going to have an effect on manufacturing. Sales is having an effect. So everywhere, in fact, it's hard to find anything that's not being affected in some ways by this disruption. And yet, even though jobs are being affected, we've got a skill shortage. We've got a problem. Because, for example, graphics designers used to be taught just how to lay out print layouts, right? Well, schools are having trouble keeping up because then we didn't need quite as many print designers, didn't realize that we didn't need quite as many at first, but then started needed people that could design web pages. And then we needed people that could design for the mobile devices because that's a different talent. And we've got to look at it a different way. And now we need actually user interface experts, which is a little bit different even at that. And the schools, I mean, they had to go away from learning print shop to begin to learn things like Flash, and now that's not even good enough. I got to learn HTML5, and I got to learn all these other things. The schools are having trouble keeping up, and in many ways, they're still back teaching the old way of doing print layouts. But it's not just that. Look at things like marketing. When we talk about digital marketing, there's a lot of opportunity there. There's not a lot of experience out there. CMOs are concerned about it. They're struggling with that, and they're trying to do it as best they can. Or I get into the cybersecurity space, and there's a huge issue there because we don't have enough security professionals. Or they say one of the sexiest professions, I thought that was kind of an interesting way to put it, now is going to be a data scientist. People that can actually analyze this big data and make conclusions out of it. So we've got a shortage out of skills. Privacy, big concern. Did your mama ever tell you that if you're not doing something wrong, then you shouldn't have to worry about it? My mama used to tell me things like that, okay? And there are people that say, well, I'm not doing anything wrong, so I shouldn't have to worry about my privacy. And yet, if you think about it for a moment, how many of you are willing to give up everything about you to the government so they can serve you better? Everybody raise your hand that's willing to do that, okay? Even security. I mean, if you think about it for a moment, we struggled a lot when the TSA came in and we started having all this security going through there, and people still complain about it to some extent. And yet, what they're trying to do is protect us. We understand that. But we struggle with it. We struggled a lot with things like when we found out Edward Snowden, when we got the exposure that the NSA knows all these things about us. Cell phone companies are capturing all these things. In fact, your phone, even if you're not making a call, and even if it's not a smartphone, your cell phone, if you're carrying it around in your pocket, it's actually pinging that tower. They know where you are. They know what's going on. In fact, I was talking to someone not too awful long ago, they can actually make predictions with pretty good certainty of who you're going to talk to tomorrow at what time. And for that matter, where you're going to be. Because we're creatures of habit. And they've got all that data already. And it's not like you said, oh, yeah, you can go track me for that. So privacy is a huge concern. And it's not just a concern, well, let me put it this way. There are ethical concerns that people are concerned about there. How far can we really go with this kind of thing? Cybersecurity. You know, huge issues. Huge issues. People tell you that it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. You're going to get hit. And honestly, you do everything you can to prepare for it, but you better be prepared for what's going to happen after you get hit, because that's really what the issue is going to be. Nation states are being involved, and it's not just China and North Korea. That's what we used to think. U.S. is obviously involved. Lots of countries are involved in it, and they look at things like the electrical grid, the nuclear power plants, the water plants, different things like that, and they're trying to strike them. But they don't not only look at those things, infrastructure-wise, they're looking at your company. And it's not just the nation state. Organized crime is big into this, and they've invested a lot of money in this. And so, what do you think it would help? I mean, would it help you to know what your competitor's doing? Would it help you to get to market faster if you could maybe figure out what your competitor's doing, or figure out some way to slow them down? Or what about something like, you know, we're sharing information back and forth with suppliers today. What if we went ahead and said, somebody's going to change that information just a little bit? I mean, huge issues that could happen out of that. But the biggest cybersecurity threat is you. 90% of senior managers say that they have actually emailed or put into Dropbox or something corporate files. 50% of them say that when I leave the company, I take corporate files with me. So there's issues out of that. We've got to be aware of it. And by the way, if your IT person tells you, don't worry about security, I got that handled, be worried, very worried. You need to be looking at and making sure you've got outside help with those kinds of things. So what's holding us back? Too often, we've got a cash cow. We've got a profitable company. We're trying to make the next quarter's profits. We've got all those kind of things going on. So we're concerned about that. And we've got to make sure that we're doing that, so that actually holds us back. And as we're doing that, we actually have developed a protect and defend the status quo. We've got all these barriers to entry. We've got these regulations. We've got those things, and they're going to protect us. Honestly, it won't protect you anymore, because people are coming at you from other sides of the world. People are coming at you with other technologies. The taxi drivers are trying to fight Uber right now. They're not being very successful at it. People are trying to fight Airbnb. They're not going to be successful. Too many people are assuming it won't happen to them. It's a huge mistake. You know, Blockbuster thought that. Lots of other companies, Kodak thought that. Sometimes we have a lack of urgency. Sometimes what happens is we don't really know where it's going to go. And so we have a lack of vision. Sometimes we blame it on the old technology we've got. Or sometimes we just don't know what to do. I got news for you. If these are issues, you need to be overcoming them. So what can we do? We look at, first of all, recognize this is not just an IT project or series of projects. This is something that's going to change the very core of your company. It's going to eliminate the silos in your company. It's going to unify the processes and the information. It's going to create new products. It's going to create new services. It's going to tie you in tighter with your supply chain. It's going to do all these things. It's a huge deal. It's got to have leadership from the top. You need to change the game internally. Look at how you're looking at things. Too often what's happening is we've got a silo over here and a silo over here, and they both think they're doing good things for the company, but honestly, they're at odds with each other. We're not driving forward together. We're not focused. Our culture needs to be much more about empowerment. We've got a lot of people in our companies that honestly, they're not engaged. I mean, there's studies done that like 80% of them are not engaged. They're there for a paycheck. And what I tell people when I work with them is, I don't want just your hands. I want your head and I want your heart. And it's up to me to figure out how to help them get that. Because that's what's going to make the difference. Think about how much management we've put in place to watch over those people because we don't trust them. I mean, really, that's what a lot of it is. We've got to develop, Stephen M. Covey calls it the speed of trust. You need to become an expert in how to do changes. There have been lots of great strategies, lots of projects that have failed because we don't know how to change people and how to influence them to change. We've got to learn how to do that, and there are ways to do it. But even those studies keep changing all the time. Become a student of that. Obsess about your customer. Really, really focus on it. Your speed of execution has got to be dramatically increased. And you've got to be much more flexible as a company than you've ever been before. What that's going to happen, you're going to see companies begin to shrink. They're going to be reaching out to their competition and do co-opetition with them. They're going to have other companies that are coming in that they're going to outsource. In essence, what happens is, or have a cooperative agreement, that are going to cause these companies to shrink because I don't need all these things. Get the help you need. That's one thing I would really emphasize to you. Get the help you need. Get somebody that's going to go out and look at that. Get somebody that's going to challenge you. You know, it's almost a given that within the next 10 years, you're going to face some kind of event that's going to be a huge disrupting event, perhaps even an extinction event for you. And the problem is, by the time you recognize it, it may be too late for you to react. That's what happened to Research in Motion. That's what happened to Blockbuster. I mean, name company after company. John Cotter wrote a book called Accelerate. And he said, I could name you 1,000 companies that very same kind of thing happened to. realize time is not your friend. You've got to have a sense of urgency about this, and it's got to be going quickly. But overall, recognize too, the payoff is worth it. Cap Jim and I did a study. You're digitally astute, 26% more profitability than your competitors. That's a huge difference. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Questions?
Your points are well taken, and when you're dealing with a corporation, that's one night to solve. I don't know what it is. But when you're dealing with a corporation, they have budgets, they have advertising, they have expenses, they have labor and all that. What percent today, this is not dealt with in the past, but what percentage of their budget should now be included to do this kind of thing?
You know, it's going to be different from industry to industry and company to company. But so I have a hard time answering it from a percent of budget. But what I will tell you is that if I were in a large industry, a large company, what I would do is I would take a single division and begin experimenting and moving forward with that, and then begin taking those same experiences and moving it out to the rest of them. Because if we don't begin making that move, we're going to run into trouble. And again, it's not just the technology, it's attitude changes, it's culture changes. I mean, there's huge things that are happening there. Anyone else? Yeah.
You talked about this being a lot more pervasive thing than just technology. Do you see many companies really tackling this as a very big pervasive project and tackling all these issues you're talking about in one big project, or is it a piece at a time?
The ones that have the vision and have the leadership that they should have are actually beginning to tackle it properly. And some of those, as I said, if they're really large companies, they're doing a division at a time. But you can't just this cannot be a bolt-on strategy. This can't be just something that says, okay, here's the strategy for my company, now here's the digital strategy. It doesn't work that way because it's so pervasive that it changes everything, even your organizational structure. So that's what company, I mean, and there's not enough companies doing that yet today. But the ones that are, I mean, we saw a 26% profitability difference.
Anyone else?
I had a couple of comments. These are kind of comments more than questions. I read an article or noticed an article yesterday, and what you talked about earlier about business valuations, that Spotify, the streaming music service, is valued more than the entire music industry. And that is amazing, and it's just a perfect example of your Airbnb example. And that's why Hollywood and these music companies are pitching the fit, because they're sticking to their old models of selling CDs or whatever, and it's not. Content is gone. It's all digital. It's all digitized, and that's like you said with Blockbuster. They offered the space to go in there and say, nah, we're not going to go into that space, and Netflix did it. Number of devices. When you're like on the Moore's law too, like when you say, well, okay, well, how are we going to incorporate trillions of devices? But what you think about is, well, they're going to be smaller than we can't see them, right? But it'll be processors and everything in these devices that we can't see. And they'll probably be in our bodies. That's something to think about. And then the values too. So you're right, like as a society as a whole, like we don't have a vision for technology. It's all provided based off of these large companies, Google, Apple. They have the vision. They are providing us these products. But I think it would be responsible of the consumers, probably even at an individual level, to create a value system for how you're going to incorporate technology into your life, right? Because I think a lot of times we're just taking, oh, this is cool, this is cool, this is cool. But right, it can be so much that you're not efficient with it, right?
Yeah.
That's just my comment.
A couple of things that are going on. Google actually has created a contact that you put in your eye that has a sensor in it that can measure the glucose level of your body for people that are diabetic, excuse me. I mean, you've got that going on. I didn't get enough into the cybersecurity, but honestly, the things that are happening there, there's so much to steal that it is so huge. I mean, I really encourage it. Did you have a question?
I was just going to just ask for fun. Will Apple Watch destroy Seiko and Rolex and all the other watch companies? What do you think?
I don't think so, but let me tell you what's going on with that. Not only the Apple Watch, but some of the other wearables that are coming around. Where the impact is going to be is in things like the healthcare industry, because now I can monitor lots of different pieces of my health. I met a lady that actually, she said she's got an elderly mother that lives away from her and wants to continue to live alone. She's put a sensor on her coffee pot, on her refrigerator, on several other things. So she actually gets a text message if her mother doesn't pick up the coffee pot by 10 o'clock in the morning. And so she calls her up, say, "Mom, have you had your coffee yet today?" And her mom one day said, "Yes, I went to Starbucks and got it." But, so, yeah, David.
I was just going to make an observation, comment. I look around the room, I'm a little bit older, so I've been able to live through most of these phases. But I'm of the belief now, in every organization, you need someone that's a psychologist, for lack of a better term, because so much of this is driven by the human nature, and so much of it makes us each individual be able to become explorers, whether we're users or creators of technology. We explore new horizons, and it's coming faster than we can do. And the psychologist helps understand the customer, helps understand the relations within the organization. I think that's going to be one of the fastest growing professions.
That's a good point. Yeah, it's a good point.
Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed it this morning. Like you said, when we started out, the whole objective was to give you something that was out a little beyond the curve, a little beyond your normal thought process. We appreciate that. I would like to point out that Ryan Goss, who was sitting here in the middle talking about some of this stuff, has an unenviable job of trying to take accountants, tax people, investment bankers, and drag us forward through technology every day. He heads up our IT group inside our firm, and bless his heart, he has little dark tread marks that he drags people through this process. So we do understand, but I can tell you that we have seen it affect our business. In fact, I was talking to a recruiter yesterday, and it was funny. She said, "You're looking for auditors, you're looking for this." She said, "How much travel do you have?" I said, "None." She said, "What do you mean none?" I said, "We don't have to go out anymore. Everything's done with data rooms. Everything's electronically uploaded. Everything's moved. We don't have to go out in the field. We don't have all that inefficiency of travel and travel costs and airplanes and all that. It doesn't matter where you're on the globe." And she went, and it was interesting. She was the recruiter, and she said, "I had not thought about that." And I went, "Really?" And I said, "So I'll get back to you later because I'm going to call somebody else." and I thought that was interesting that Ryan had brought us and helped us get to those levels. So you can see the impact a little bit everywhere. We're doing more today, I know, in our firms and in our entities with fewer people than we ever did before. And I think that's some of the same impact. Well, our next meeting is on May the 20th. Another out there kind of topic. We're going to have somebody from an organization here in Dallas called Halftime Institute. Don't know if any of you have heard of it. It's a gentleman who was very, very successful, sold a company, made a lot of money, and said, "I'm at the halftime in my life and in my career. What do I want to do to realign my personal and professional goals? And where do I want to go? Where do I want to spend my time? What do I want to do?" And I think it's, again, some of the efficiencies, some of the ability to live longer, do different things, that kind of stuff. And so we're going to have somebody come and talk about some of that. I think it should be very interesting. We will make sure and get the invitations out to that. It will be our last event this spring. We take a summer break since everybody's traveling and that kind of stuff. I laugh in the U.S. We're becoming more European. You'll notice that everybody in June, July, that time period disappears. Everybody's back to school in August. So we likewise will pick up August, September sometime and have some fall events. But we appreciate you coming. Again, please turn in your forms, that kind of stuff with us. If there's any other questions and stuff, feel free to stick around a few minutes. We'll be here. There is some time for networking, of course, before and afterwards, but we really appreciate it. Make sure to drop your certificates by for CPE out front, and we look forward to seeing you tonight. Thank you. Thanks for hosting. Oh, you're welcome.